Good evening and welcome to the 2025 Shakespeare Lecture presented by the McGill Friends of the Libraries and Stratford Festival. My name is Stephanie Taylor and I am the Chair of Events of the McGill Friends of the Libraries, a volunteer group of local and international committed McGill Libraries advocates. We would like to acknowledge that McGill University is situated on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. We acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose presence marks this territory on which peoples of the world now gather. Founded in 1989, the mission of the Friends of the Libraries is to develop community interest in the libraries, build awareness about their rich and diverse collections, and promote initiatives to create long-term support for the libraries. We share our passion for the libraries and for the advancement of learning and knowledge by hosting 3 free annual public lectures. The F.R. Scott Lecture in honor of the Canadian lawyer, poet, intellectual, and constitutional scholar, which this year will feature a conversation with Supreme Court Justice Obosawin on February 5th. The Hugh McLennan Lecture in honor of the internationally acclaimed Canadian author and in partnership with Blue Metropolis Literary Festival. And finally, tonight's Shakespeare Lecture, which was first established in 1992. J'aimerais remercier nos partenaires à Stratford, l'équipe multimédia à McGill, l'équipe de la bibliothèque, la faculté de droit, la division des livres rares et collections spéciales et l'avancement universitaire pour leur aide dans l'organisation de cet événement ce soir. I would like to now introduce Lenore Harris, our brilliant and wonderful chair of the Friends of the Libraries, who will set the stage for us for this incredible and thought-provoking Shakespeare lecture.
Thank you, Stephanie, for your very kind words. Ladies and gentlemen, Shakespeare has arrived at McGill University. My name is Lenore Harris. I'm chair of McGill Friends of the Libraries. Tonight we have the unique opportunity to present an innovative conversation between 3 esteemed speakers, Antoni Cimolino, Laurette Dubé, and Paul Yachnin. I'm going to repeat a little bit of what Stephanie said now. The Shakespeare Lecture was established by Friends of the Libraries in 1992 to build awareness of the library's exceptional collections in the area of all things Shakespeare. Since 2011, we are proud to have partnered with Stratford Festival. Antoni, Martha Henry, Jonathan Goad, Scott Wentworth, Paul Gross, Kimberly Rampersand, and most recently, Jessica B. Hill are just a few of the actors and directors who have graced our stage. Shakespeare has a long history with McGill Libraries, being the most represented author in the library's rare books and special collections. This includes copies of the original folios to fine press illustrated editions of the sonnets, along with favorite tales by Shakespeare included in children's books. The early editions of Shakespeare's collected plays in rare books and special collections include a copy of the second folio edition from 1632 and 2 copies of the 4th folio printed in 1685. From the 18th century, there are more than a dozen multi-volume sets of the entire works of Shakespeare edited by literary greats such as Samuel Johnson. Of the modern fine press books, one of McGill's best examples is a work on King Lear, illustrated with powerful wood engravings in a limited edition by a woman-owned private press, the Janus Press, located in Vermont. There is quite a number of cheaply produced Anglo-American pocket play scripts intended for theatergoers, not to mention the hundreds of 19th century British playbills which advertise scheduled performances of Shakespeare. Also of note, the Sir E.K. Chambers Shakespeare collection, acquired in 1954, encompasses 400 printed studies about Shakespeare, his plays, and the Elizabethan theatre. Over the years, the libraries has been fortunate to receive numerous generous gifts to strengthen the Shakespeare collection and make it world-renowned. This year, thanks to a successful collaboration with McGill Collection Services, Shakespeare legacy titles are now secured and discoverable in the online catalog. Of these is an astounding, scarce edition produced in New York of the works of Shakespeare, which has chiseled wood covers and all edges sculpted in gilt. We invite you to come and explore the collection for yourself. Antoni, Laurette, Paul, come and join me while I introduce you. So on our extreme left is Antoni Cimolino, no stranger to the Friends of the Libraries, as he has participated in the Shakespeare lecture numerous times. Antoni is artistic director of the Stratford Festival, a post he assumed in 2012, having served as general director, executive director, and general manager, in addition to other roles. After making his acting debut at the festival in 1988, he moved into directing in the mid-1990s. He has directed critically acclaimed productions such as Hamlet, King Lear, The Tempest, and The Alchemist, both at the Stratford Festival and elsewhere. While his primary interest has been the works of Shakespeare, he has also worked on plays by such writers as Jonson, Molière, Schiller, and De Filippo. In 2013, during his first season as artistic director, Antoni established the Meehan Forum, a season-long series of more than 150 events that take the program's themes and illustrate their relevance today. That same season, he directed The Merchant of Venice, starring Tom McCamus and Scott Wentworth, and Mary Queen of Scots with Shauna McKenna and Lucy Peacock, a production that was extended an unprecedented 4 times. In 2014, Antoni and executive director Anita Gaffney launched Stratford Festival on Film, an ambitious project to capture all of Shakespeare's plays. Today, these and other creative endeavors are part of a huge catalog of arts programming available on the festival's subscription streaming platform, Stratfest at Home. In 2018, Antoni and Gaffney launched a $100 million campaign to build a new Tom Patterson Theatre, which opened 4 years later. The theatre has won many architectural awards, including the Governor General's Medal in Architecture. This summer, Antoni will be directing The Winter's Tale there. In 2015, he was appointed as a member of the Order of Canada. 4 years later, he received the Peter Horndorf Arts Leadership Award, and in 2023, he received the honorary award from My Entertainment World in recognition of the 2023 Stratford Theatre season. Laurette, on our extreme right, is professor and James McGill Chair in Marketing and Consumer and Lifestyle Psychology at the Des Hôtels Faculty of Management. She is the founding president and scientific director of the McGill Center for the Convergence of Health and Economics. After training in nutrition, she completed graduate studies in finance, marketing, and consumer psychology. She is particularly interested in the study of emotions, behavioral economics, and the neurobehavioral and socioeconomic processes underlying consumer lifestyle and health behaviors. Her translational research focuses on how to use the knowledge to inspire more effective behavioral change and ecosystem transformation to solve the complex problems and opportunities of our modern society. At the McGill Center for Convergence, Health, and Economics, she established convergence and system approaches to research and innovation in agri-food, health, and economics that place people at the center of society. Laurette is the principal investigator of the tri-agency-funded Smart Pan-Canadian Training Platform for Smart Cities. She is also the academic lead for the Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada-funded FCI Canada platform, which connects agri-food businesses to improve their resilience in domestic and international markets. She led Canada's participation in the international collaboration Food Safety for Africa, funded by the European Horizons program, both programs rooted in the convergence by design approach that she pioneered with other members of a global network of scientists and leaders. Laurette has been a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada since 2006. In 2011, she received the Woman of Distinction Award from the Women's Y Foundation for Social and Environmental Sciences, and in 2013, she was awarded the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal. Last but not least, in the middle, Paul Yachnin is Tomlinson Professor of Shakespeare Studies here at McGill. He is director of the international project Early Modern Conversions. Prior to that, Paul directed the Making Publics project from 2005 to 2010. In 2009-2010, he served as the president of the Shakespeare Association of America. Paul is the author of Stage Rights and the Culture of Playgoing in Early Modern England, co-authored with Anthony Dawson, editor of Richard II and the Tempest, and co-editor of 7 books, including Making Publics in Early Modern Europe, Forms of Association, and Conversion Machines in Early Modern Europe, Apparatus, Artifice, Body. With Bronwyn Wilson, he edited a new multi-year, multi-volume series from Edinburgh Press, Conversions, Religions, Cultures, and Transformations in Early Modern Europe and its Worlds. Paul is currently writing his next book, Making Publics in Shakespeare's Playhouse, forthcoming from the University of Edinburgh Press. His ideas and the ideas of his MAPS colleagues about the social life of art were featured on the CBC Radio Ideas series, The Origins of the Modern Public. He publishes non-scholarly articles on Shakespeare and modern life, including Alzheimer's disease, What Would Shakespeare Do?, and Tragedy as a Way of Life. Paul has a keen interest in higher education and practice, which has been the focus of publications in the journals Policy Options, University Affairs, and Humanities, and of projects such as Trace, Transborder, a collaboration of 12 universities on 5 continents. Paul is a very good friend of the Friends of the Libraries, as reflected in his long-standing history with us. In 2007, he was awarded Friend of the Year. He has delivered or moderated 7 different Shakespeare lectures, and now, for his 8th time, Paul will take on the role of both speaker and moderator. The floor is yours, Paul.
Thank you so much, Lenore, for that extraordinarily warm welcome. It is wonderful to see everybody here tonight, the coldest night of the year. It's wonderful to be here talking to you with my 2 wonderful colleagues. The world is in peril. I don't know what that means. I'll change my tone. Thank you. And money making involves money, wealth, power, prestige. Meaning is something different. It has to do with your sense of yourself as a human being, your sense of community with other human beings. And the separation of money making from meaning making is a driver that has put the world in peril today. What we're going to do this evening is suggest a way forward by thinking with Shakespeare about how we might be able to bring money-making and meaning-making together again. This is just a first move in what must be a very long journey back toward something like wholeness. So I'm going to ask my colleague here, Laurette, to tell us a bit more about money-making and meaning-making. And I should tell you, this is her thing. She reached out to me last summer and said, "Are you interested in Shakespeare?" And I said, "I don't know." So we have been working together on this. Oh, you got it.
I think I have my mic. Very nice to meet all of you. I'm sure when Lenore was giving my bio, you were wondering what this lady is doing tonight. And one over 1992, that brings us 30 years almost. I've been, my late husband was a passionate Shakespearean, and I've been at Stratford every season for 30 years, and progressively got to understand, even if I'm a French Canadian, understand the richness that is in Shakespeare and his work and so on. So that's one part. The second part is that the center and the whole agenda of what we call health and economic convergence, or money making and meaning making, the last 400 years since the first industrial revolution have been doing a lot of great things for mankind, but we are also at a level that what used to be externality that has no impact on our life or on society have become everyday. And therefore, we need to look at how can we tweak our model of first industrial revolution in a way that keep the good stuff, but also make individual enterprise and enterprise, whether it's business or healthcare or whatever sector, more aware, and society more aware that if we talk about climate change, we cannot have unlimited economic growth in a finite planet with resources. So we are better waking up, and it is possible. The last 400 years are a few seconds in the 24 hours journey of evolution. And there is change that can be made, but at the core of this, it's the person, and it is human-made system. And who better than Shakespeare and the arts and so on to understand that human and that human-made society. So that's the reason there.
So we come to Shakespeare. We come to Shakespeare because we know that he was one of the inventors of the modern entertainment industry. They built a playhouse and they charged people money to get in. This was a new thing. And he made money, but he also made meaning. And so he is what we might call a social entrepreneur. And my colleague, Antoni Cimolino, is a bit of a copycat because he too is interested in money making. You need money to have the theater festival continue, but you do that by making meaning. Antoni, I'm going to turn to you and ask you to speak about your work as a copycat.
It's kind of a broad question. So, so yeah, Shakespeare, Paul, you're right. He not only was one of the first people coming forward in this new entertainment industry of theater in the 1590s, but he also invented new genres of play, like the history plays, which were huge. I mean, they became the three parts of Henry VI, Richard III, became enormous immediately, like big hits, and filled with intrigue and politics of the church, the aristocracy, the commoners. And for people, even though they were about situations that were over 100 years and more before the time of the people watching it, they'd felt very contemporary. It felt to them like what was being seen on stage was, they're talking about other kings, but really they're talking about Elizabeth. They're talking about, the time right now. And we feel that today. So it was, he could have simply created something much lighter, something that didn't have so much meaning. But by going and creating something which was so topical, so powerful, as all his writing is, whether it's tragedies, comedies, he managed to fuse together meaning-making with incredible money-making. And I'm in a long line of copycats on this subject, because the idea that artists are meaning makers, but they're not money makers, and they really don't know how to run their own affairs. It's a romantic 19th century construct, right? Don't trust them. They'll just cut their ears off and, do unreasonable things and spend all the money. And, artists have always known how to run their own affairs. I mean, Michelangelo knew exactly how much to overcharge the Pope for the Sistine Chapel ceiling, right? They had workshops, right? You can always tell who did, and Joshua Reynolds, he clearly never did the hands. I mean, you could tell that they had systems in place. They knew how to run their affairs. And this was certainly true of Shakespeare's time. And he was not simply an artist and a creator. He was part of a joint stock company. I mean, that's early capitalism in the entertainment business, right? He owned part of the business. The only reason we have the folio, which contains many plays that aren't there in any of the other versions. Like, they used to print things as the play went on called quartos, which were tiny, and they were inexpensive. They just covered one play, and you could get it quickly. And we have quite a few different quartos of different plays. But the folio, published in 1623, was really created because of piracy. Like, there were other people out there selling Shakespeare's plays. So his fellow players, although he had been dead for like 7 years, they wanted to make sure that they printed them properly, they printed them well, and they got the copyright. So all of this eventually comes down to the thing that we all need, which is, we need to eat. And artists are very, very practical. I mean, somebody ran up to Picasso. I don't know if this story is actually true, but I love it. And was starstruck. And this lady ran up to Pablo Picasso in a cafe and said, "Oh, Mr. Picasso, what do you artists talk about in cafes?" And he said, "Madam, when artists get together in cafes, we talk about the price of turpentine." Art is very practical. We imagine things that are, original, we hope, usually based on models that exist, but are flights of fancy, but we try to make them as practical as possible. And the process of creating them are very, very practical. So, I think the word scientist was adopted based on artist. And there's, 1800 or so. And, there's a lot of similarities. We both have to be very practical. We try to, but we just use our imagination and don't get too worried about the facts.
Thank you for that. We will talk later about the work that you have done at Stratford. Here, have this one. We'll talk later about the work that you have done at Stratford. Here's the thing about Shakespeare and meaning making and money making. It's money all the way down, is what I think we want to say. That doesn't mean that it's simply a commercial undertaking. It is not at all. he is able, like my colleague here on my left, to bring money-making and meaning-making together in a way that can inform society and people in society to think differently. One of the things that we know is going on in the Playhouse, in Shakespeare's time, people are paying a penny to get in. Even poor, ordinary people who do not have a voice or a vote at all in Shakespeare's time are able to go and watch a play about Richard II. And Richard II is a bad king. And he is appointed by God. That's the standard line in the play and the standard line in Shakespeare's England. The system in place in Shakespeare's England is about the divine appointment of kings. And nobody challenges that or dismantles it in the play, and yet they find a way in the course of the play to take him down and to replace him with somebody who they believe will be a better king. Here's something for us to think about. We all live under systems that we have created and that now are sovereign over us. The question is, can Shakespeare teach us ways to squeeze through the cracks and fissures in those systems that are sovereign over us so that we can do things differently and achieve a certain level of freedom for change? And I think that's the kind of thing we're talking about when we're talking about how art like Shakespeare's plays can help us move forward. Laurette, you're really the person who has created this undertaking. I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit more about how someone like Shakespeare or another artist or opera, which is another thing that you love, is able to help people think differently, to punch holes in the walls of the way things are. That's the kinds of things we think are just the way it is. Art can say, it doesn't have to be that way.
I think that the way, does it work?
It's a talking stick.
Okay. I think that the way I would address this, Lenore told you that I did a PhD in behavioral economics 30 years ago. So economics and so on, our view of human have been either completely rational or completely stupid. What art is doing is getting the whole of what it is to be human, with high aspiration, agency, and all that. And this is from that perspective. I was telling you that I was at Wagner's famous festival last year, and you are just transported in another planet, let's say, in yourself. And that is really where art, I think, can bring you as a higher aspiration as you can get. Also understanding a bit more in a holistic manner that life is not just money, but there is a necessity that is there also. So this is this whole complex human animal that art is able to capture better than we do in science or in marketing, for that matter. And that's really kind of part of the challenge of the modern time, is to see, can we, interestingly, I have colleagues who are studying, what does it do to your willingness to pay for a product when you tap into the higher meaning of your life? And guess what? You would pay less because you realize that much of the meaning in life costs nothing. So there's a whole dynamics that is quite complex.
Thank you so much for ringing the value of art and entertainment. Art can often be thought to be off by itself in some higher area, but Shakespeare is an artist, but also an entertainer. Here's the thing that I want to ask you Antoni. I started this evening by saying the world is in peril. Can Shakespeare help us begin to deal with the peril we face? But it's so important to understand that Shakespeare himself is living in a world in peril. And I think, Antoni, you have something really important to bring to the table about that.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, we're lucky that Shakespeare wrote when he did. I mean, he was writing at the end of the 16th century, the beginning of the 17th century. It was a particular time of enormous, painful change in Western Europe. The Reformation, 1517. Up till that point, Europeans had one God. They could agree, the Christian community could agree. There were dynastic politics, other politics, but everybody was a Christian that believed in the same God. And that had totally changed. Suddenly people were killing each other over who that God was. And, it was a time where all the certainties kind of went out the window. Scientific, Copernicus in the early part of the 16th century removed humanity from the center of the universe by saying that actually the earth goes around the sun, not the other way around. Up till then, the sun would rotate around humanity's earth, right? We were at the center of everything. And there were many other, Galileo in the years that followed around 1600, 1620. In politics, you had a situation which, the divine right king was long gone, but you had really, Britain in many ways was a theocracy with where sermons were set every week so that it wouldn't cause problems. Elizabeth did not have an heir. That was a huge source of tension. James I, who followed and eventually took over, someone who was, completely illegitimate, suddenly became very legitimate and was an absolutist. And remember that in Shakespeare's time, we always think of Chekhov as being a pre-revolutionary writer. Shakespeare, in 1642, you had a revolution taking place there. Climate change. There was in the 16th century the mini ice age, which made it so that people found it very, very hard to be able to. There was famine, to be able to live. So there were a series of things. The economy as a whole was moving away from a feudal land-based system to a capitalist international trade system. And speaking of international, remember that it was just in the beginning of the 16th century, the end of the 15th, that they discovered the New World. So suddenly you had a completely different. So in this time of incredible change, people were trying to understand, what does it all mean? Like before, they at least knew what was virtuous, what was sinful, and they might all have a way of getting to heaven. Now all of that was out the window. And it felt like the New World was extremely cruel, very money-oriented. There was a real sense of realpolitik in the sense that just get it done. And the clever people were very powerful now. It's like today. There's not a lot of room for integrity, ethics. I mean, you can do those things, but fundamentally, make it a hobby. Because we got to get on with running the world. And so we're faced with many of the same issues. In his time, it wasn't enough simply to be entertaining. In some ways, you had to examine these things. Shakespeare's the only writer of his time of any significance who managed to stay out of jail. Everybody else went to jail because they would always land in it, right? And he had a way of skirting it. You mentioned Richard II. Richard II was probably the closest he went to going to jail because there was a performance of Richard II that was put on by Elizabeth's ex-lover, Essex, and it was part of a plot. He had to, there were pamphlets at the time saying it's time to rid ourselves of this old woman's government. And he was trying to, by putting on that play and having these pamphlets out, say she's old, she's meaningless, she's powerless, just like Richard II. And Elizabeth nearly jailed Shakespeare. She said to a courtier at the time, "Know ye not that I am Richard II?" So these plays were painfully close to touching nerves. The great thing about artists is that by using their imagination, sometimes not really understanding where the impulse comes from, they tap the age, the form and pressure of the age, of the time, and they're able to put into words and to create something that is actually there in the zeitgeist that maybe we don't want to talk about, or maybe is something that we hadn't really recognized in ourselves. And so, it's served that function since the earliest text we have, which is Aeschylus's The Persians, which is 25 centuries ago. We're hardwired to do plays. We need them. They tell us who we are.
Thank you. Let me follow up and riff on what you were saying. Richard II was selected to start off the Essex Rebellion, and it failed to do that. And one of the reasons it failed to do that, I believe, is because Shakespeare creates a playhouse and plays that don't tell people what to think, but help them think feelingly with each other about matters of common concern. It's so important to understand that the people who went to the playhouse, and the Globe could hold up to 3,000 people. It was a moneymaker. And most of those people were commoners who had no power, no voice. And they are there together, thinking together about what makes a good king, at what point people are allowed to revolt against the king and take power. Shakespeare's planting the seeds of what we think of as modern democracy by inviting people in to think together. Now, just as you said, Shakespeare cozies up to people in power. He's also an entertainer at the court. And so one of the things that entertainers can do, because they're harmless, it's just play, is they can give people a place where they can think playfully, but in ways that have serious long-term consequences. So one of the things that, we had a moot court here many years ago where the court of Shakespeare ruled that same-sex marriage was legal in the jurisdiction of the law of Shakespeare. We did that before the Parliament of Canada ruled that same-sex marriage was legal. So theater is always ahead of the curve because it is playful. We're just fooling around here. And I think that's so important for us to remember that it is a form that brings money-making and meaning-making together. All of those editions of Shakespeare's plays that you were shown at the beginning, it's money all the way down. People made them in order to make money, just as they did the first folio. So I think it's so important to bear in mind the power of play that theater can sponsor. Over to you to talk a little bit more about what we're going to do by... Give me this back. Here's the challenge. It's a serious, serious challenge. We three believe that Shakespeare and the arts can help us move forward. How do we begin to develop conversations with people who are in positions where they're making policy? This morning we had a sitting senator and a man who was a senator a few years ago talking with us about Shakespeare. We want to develop those conversations that enable us to bring art back into conversation with policy.
Okay, talking about policy and art, maybe I will elaborate a bit about this. In my bio, we're talking about the work in Africa and so on. We are still developing the world and operating the world with the first model of industrial revolution, so that this divide not just between money and meaning, divide between sector in society, divide between the individual and collective and so on. And this is the Western model. And the economic development, we call this economic convergence, which is the rest is converging with the West. And the question is that we are at the fourth industrial revolution. Can we as I said at the beginning, keep the good things, but tweak the model. So my question, maybe back to you, is that beyond Shakespeare, you get artists in all culture. How do you think that Shakespeare-like art in culture around the world? You had a play at Stratford not that long ago by the Nobel Prize in literature. It was excellent. So how can we think about culture and art in helping the world? Our kind of slogan that we talk about, we call for a world reset from economic convergence, the rest converging with the West, to a convergence economy, where those divides are not there anymore, but still in a way that the world is operating. So culturally, how can we think of art as helping within culture and across culture in doing this transition? We are in a state that we need it sooner than later. Back to you, my dear.
I'm just going to pass the talking stick to Antoni. The question is a very hard question. The only thing that I'd bring forward now is that McGill's Faculty of Law, one of its fields of interest is legal plurality. That law is formed not only by the state, by parliamentarians, but also by people together. We know this in indigenous communities, that they develop their own legal systems. They're not black letter law, it's not written down, but everyone knows what the right thing to do is, what the wrong thing is to do. I think we can say also that art and entertainment is able to develop law. Another example, of course, is the Me Too movement, which brought law in to replace the failure, not black letter law, but law nevertheless, to replace the failure of the courts to convict someone, say, like Jan Ghomeshi. But Shakespeare also, and other artists, put ideas in people's heads that then become ways of doing things, ways of judging others. And so one of the things that art can do is to create law. Bear in mind, this is not the law of the state. Nevertheless, it is law.
I try to approach the question in another way. I think the great strength of art is what Stanislavski called, or theater, is what Stanislavski called the magic if. If it were so, and Shakespeare keeps on bringing this up, touchstone, as you like it, goes on, he says, if is your only peacemaker. Because you see, if is conditional, right? Like, if you said so, then I said so. But of course, if you didn't say that, then I did. So by posing that if, it stimulates, it makes us able to use our imaginations. It gets rid of our objections and say, imagine a country, not this country, but imagine a country where they were entering a new golden age. Okay? Not like any country, right? So in that magic if, you have an ability to explore things, and so plays are always like pills, There's got to be a lot of sugar on the outside, so you take the pill, and then there's got to be something good on the inside. If there's too much sugar, you go, ugh, and it's very unsatisfying. If there's too much medicine on the inside, then you spit it out, and you're very aware of what they've just done to you. So it's that getting rid of the frontal lobe, the objections to us, and taking people's hearts on a trip. That is the critical thing about the theater. So that we can then get rid of the objections that we have, suspend our disbelief, and begin to put ourselves in the place of the people on the stage and imagine what that will be like. There's this beautiful speech that you talked about Henry Moore, for a play that Shakespeare was a play doctor in. He wrote at least one speech for it, where Henry Moore in this play has to quell a riot against immigrants. So Sir Thomas More, Henry Moore. Sir Thomas More quells this riot, and he basically says to the mob, he helps them understand that these are people like them, and that if they do something right now against these immigrants who are here, and they eventually have to face justice, and they were, let's say, banished, they would find themselves in another country where maybe they're not wanted, they're not accepted, they're not. The writing that Shakespeare does in this, in his own handwriting, one of the few examples of it that we have, is beautiful. And it's all with enabling us to have compassion for somebody else, to put ourselves in their shoes. That's what theater does. And that's its power. That's what it can bring to the world.
Let me just riff off what you're saying, and what Thomas More says in that speech that Shakespeare wrote is something like, can you see the faces of the mothers and their babies who are trying to climb out of the sea onto the land? He asks us in play after play after play to stand face to face with the other. In a play like The Merchant of Venice, and I have talked a lot about this, it is anti-Semitic. The anti-Semitism is baked into the language of the play. That's fine for me, because the play also asks us to stand face to face with Shylock. Not that it purges the play of anti-Semitism. It allows us to take that in also, but it also allows us and invites us to stand face to face with him. And this goes on in play after play. Catherine, at the end of The Taming of the Shrew, is tamed. She really is tamed. I used to love to think that she wasn't, but I finally went, she is. But we stand face to face with her. And so we see her. And I think one of the things that art does, and it's not just Shakespeare, Anne-Marie MacDonald, who's here with us tonight, has brought us face to face with so many extraordinary characters. Not that she tells us these are people you should love because they're perfectly virtuous. These are people that you have to see. This is one of the things that literary art, and not just literary art, Rembrandt is very good at faces. So I think that's one of the things we need to embrace about art. I want to bring us, I don't know how much time we have left.
I think we have better look at the lady.
Okay. How much time did you say? Oh, so it's Q&A?
Q&A whenever you're ready and whenever.
Let us open it to the community.
God, we're ready.
You want to ask questions about King Lear, we're here. Do you have questions for us? Suggestions for us? Yes, please use the mics. Brian.
Curious to know, since we're talking about what you might do with money to make meaning, which I think is a little different from can art make money? I think that's kind of a separate question. I'm wondering about philanthropy, because that's the way rich men try to get into the kingdom of heaven. And so I'm curious to know how, is it totally out of left field? I'm sorry, I'm curious to know how to put these things together with what we're discussing.
I'm gonna just say this, Brian. You're perfectly on point. The point is not about getting as much money as you can. That's what the Bible is saying. But remember, Shylock believes in the principle of thrift. It's not about getting as much money as you can. It's about care for the community and the way in which money can contribute to that care.
I will address your question in a couple of ways. Money per se is not a sin. It is just our tendency very often that the more you have, the more you want even more. And the question is, what do you do with that? And one of the challenges that the world is having, whether it's Rockefeller or Bill Gates and so on, you make your billions and then you become philanthropy. And I work a lot with philanthropy, and sometimes I see that yes, it gives resources to NGO and to community and so on, but the question is, what about making money with the good stuff first, so that you embed the what is good for human and for society, you embed this in your day job as business. And that's really the whole morning, in fact, was on this. How can we think, and it's not just the big multinational and so on. Small and medium enterprise are the fabrics of society worldwide. So that's really kind of a change in kind of thinking that money is bad and the rest is moral and so on. It's really a revisiting this dichotomy for more fine-grained understanding. The other part, and I will be short. The other part, talking about Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and so on, is that we are at the fourth industrial revolution. So we live in a world where technology, digital or otherwise, is part of everyday life, whether Alan in medical health system, it's part of everyday life. What do we do with this? And that's really the part also that kind of for the AI industry and so on, that's where the ethical consideration and so on will be, has to become part of what is how the industry evolved and so on. But to tell you the truth, I'm also a bit concerned to see all those ultra-billionaires up there. Democracy is, if we believe in it, it is challenging. I won't fool myself or fool you.
You asked about 5 really good questions, so I was kind of going, oh, okay. I felt like a pinball inside. Ding, 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 tilt. Pinballs were a game that what. So Shakespeare, you know, he doesn't show money, taking care of what you have, thrift, you know, thrift. I'm not sure he's quite into thrift, but let's say being careful with what you have, right, is important. It's not so much that money is bad, it's living for money that is bad, I see in his plays. He had, in my view, a very agrarian view of the world. Like he believed in humility, in understanding that we can't control everything, in trying to put love and compassion first and foremost. And we're happy when a comedy ends and the beautiful young couple have all the money in the world. You know, it's not, you know, that formula works for all of us instinctively. In the Roman plays, you know, the Republic ended not so much because people got tired of democracy, but probably because of the structural issues of very, very powerful generals with armies. So when you have too much resources and individuals, they start acting for their own benefit. We're kind of in a similar moment right now. Can we survive all of these modern generals?
difficult lives, and the state does almost nothing for them, but the women band together and create a world where they're able to, you know, flourish commercially. It's commerce that offers women the opportunities, not the public, anything like that. But it does bring a certain, it was when you said ethical, I thought, well, Is it ethical, the brothel? Is it like a play, kind of anti-establishment in the way that theater is? And I just wondered how commerce, money works out in that story.
Do you want this?
Well, it's Measure for Measure is a bit of a topsy-turvy world, right? You've got a person on death row who keeps announcing, "I will not die today," and he's drunk all the time, and he says, "You can't kill me today because I'm drunk. You have to wait until I'm sober before you can ethically put me to death." So, and the brothel is, filled with colorful and extraordinary characters who have power, but it's a brothel. So, he was very kind of cheeky as well as being clear-eyed about the power of money and where people had power. And so he doesn't want, it's not Strindberg. You don't want to make it too, you don't want to, you don't want to think too closely about it because he's kind of making his points in a cheeky way. But you have a good point about that there is power there. And, yeah.
Let me take you. All's well that ends well. A woman who is a gentlewoman but not a woman of high rank is in love with a very high-ranking count who's a cad. He's powerful and rich. And she rapes him. She does. It is sex without his consent. He thinks he's sleeping with another woman. He's sleeping with his wife. And the students in my class, we had such a great fight about this. But Shakespeare is imagining how a woman can use the systems that are in place for her own advantage. And a couple of the students said, maybe she doesn't love him at all. Maybe she's just trying to get ahead. So I think find in Shakespeare, because he's a guy who came from the country and got ahead, is that sometimes he feels very ashamed about that, but sometimes he really pushes it. I'm not recommending this as a course of action to anybody, but just think that the rules are there. Shakespeare can say, sometimes you can push back against those rules.
It was an interesting conversation. I just think that Shakespeare's astonishing poetic writing of characters and varied interpretations and stagings that invite these varied interpretations and stagings help us how varied create very nuanced understandings of the character in the play. And if you want to look at Shylock and anti-Semitism, well, the society is anti-Semitic, so it's difficult to show a character unless the play is being situated in some future or out of some alternative universe where there's equality. I mean, if Shakespeare had written David and Jonathan, that would have been interesting. Then he had a different set of Jewish characters, but apparently he chose not to. So, or unless there's a hidden David and Jonathan, like hidden texts of Shakespeare's that we don't know about, that would be extremely interesting. So, so I always understand. So perhaps you could comment on how, in your own experiences, how these varied understandings, and perhaps the actors among us are very aware of this, how these varied interpretations of and stagings of roles and ideas and understandings of characters, and at Stratford you have this. I remember seeing As You Like It with Coureur de Bois and set in the forests of Canada. So how this really allows one to transcend the limitations of how character is written because they're anchored in their time. And one staging of Shylock that I've heard of, I didn't see it, but I heard of it and heard it really praised, is when Shylock is shown to be in mourning and his dress is completely different. So he's shown to be a Jewish person. And I don't know if that's always done, or it's like seeing Macbeth in Scottish dress, and which I think is probably always done now. And my understanding, literature is like the terrain of theological contestation. So do you understand Shakespeare's plays as a set of theological contestations? Because that's often what I hear and read when I read the plays. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. So variations of
that was a tough question.
Variations of interpretations and theological contestations are the two themes.
Oh boy.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you. And the actors among us.
Do you want to give it a go? Yeah.
So I'm not quite following what you're saying about theological contestation.
when you read or see your playtime in of Athens and comment on it, you don't understand that to be a set of theological contestations of Christianity and Christian doctrine and the teachings of Jesus. My gosh, my gosh.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, one of the things to say before I give it back to you is that one of the things that's in question in the plays is theology. You know, and I mentioned King Lear, but toward the end of the storm, he turns to the nearly naked man and he says, you know, what is the cause of the thunder? He's been developing various theological accounts of why the storm is raging. And at the end, he just puts all of that aside and he falls into what would later be called science. So, I mean, that's not to put everything you're saying in question, but it is to put in question the idea that it's theology all the way down.
Yeah, causation. So, yes, so those weekly sermons I talked about, frozen in time, so that was the other form of entertainment, right? People go to the theater, but they'd also, every Sunday, if you missed the service, you'd be written down as having missed, right? You had to be there. And they would listen. They would listen. They'd listen to these stories. They'd listen to the arguments. And so Shakespeare, as he says of the Bible, sets the word against the word. So he will take a series of words in a play, and as I've said today, they float them like currency to find out their true meaning. So you'll get these words at the beginning of a play, and then we'll explore them and explore them and explore them throughout the play till by the end we start to really understand what they're about. And he uses loss a lot. He will have people, like in Winter's Tale, he'll have somebody die. And it's only when they're gone that they begin to appreciate what exactly they had, you know. And that's there in all the plays. But yes, he explores the ideas that were there presented in those sermons and how they actually apply to the world we're into today. And he would do it with a great deal of ambiguity. It was very hard to know what exactly he was saying, right? Like today we talked about Henry V, who's in many ways heroic and a leader. And he's also, by the way, a war criminal, right? He shoots the war prisoners that he has. So he constantly kind of gives us two facets of things. And that's really important. It's important for the same reason we have two eyes instead of one. It gives us perspective, right?
I just say I love your question, by the way, and I think it's really pertinent. And, oh, I beg your pardon. Please.
Controversial point. I do appreciate everything you're saying. I think we all do because we all love Shakespeare. We all are disposed to the arts. I would imagine the political center of this audience is farther to the left than to the right. And of course, there are the genius are in some of these individual lines that convey. Even in an anti-Semitic play, when he says to Tuba that he would not have sold that ring to my mind, that's one of the most moving lines in all of Shakespeare. I had that it's Rachel, right? When I was a bachelor. But having said all that, Bayreuth was raised. And I think we've all been sort of hugging ourselves. But we have to also understand or address the issue of what about geniuses. I mean, I don't expect the artists to be all nice guys and nice ladies, but you know, Wagner could powerfully influence both Thomas Mann and Adolf Hitler, and the interpretations are built into the ages in which they're presented, where Shylock was shown so appallingly to a modern sensibility with great success in the 18th and 19th century. So then, first half of the 19th century. So then, how do you cope with that dichotomy? It comes down to the individual, no?
Well, okay. The Merchant of Venice is a comedy about racism. It's unusual that he would decide to write a comedy about racism. Portia is a blonde. She's referred to as the Golden Fleece. Her suitors are all Northern Europeans until they find out that if they don't get her, they're not going to be able to marry anyone. Those drop out and they're left with a bunch of Mediterraneans. North African, an Italian, a Spaniard, right? There's color coding throughout the play. It has all sorts of, the Moor who shows up is humiliated for his background. Throughout the play, this writer explores the theme of don't judge a book by its cover. That's why the caskets are lead, gold, and silver. As to Shylock, the writing in the play makes us be very much on his side. So you can take any play and make it two-dimensional, and they did that. Horrific interpretations of that play. But just reading the play, as you said yourself, when he refers to his wife's ring that his daughter has run off and sold, and what it meant to him, that kind of detail needn't be in that text. And all of a sudden, bam, we see him as our father, as our neighbor. So Shakespeare is both having us examine what we value in terms of appearances and racism and question it. So, we aren't going to agree about all of this, but for me, I do not see, I'm sorry, Paul, I do not see an anti-Semitic text. I see a text that uses anti-Semitism to make a point. And remember, there would have been how many Jews in England at that time? We don't have a count. Yeah, a small number. His Florio, who we would have had, but a small, and Florio, someone, because he quotes Florio's translation of Montaigne, is probably someone he knew. So Shakespeare, right.
One is no work of art is foolproof, and the other is Antony and I disagree. That's the point. No, that is the point. The plays open a space in which people can disagree about very important matters of shared concern.
Thank you. Thank you very much. What a great moment you gave us. Thank you so much. Bonsoir, chers amis des Bibliothèques de McGill. Je suis Guylaine Baudry, je suis la doyenne des Bibliothèques de McGill et titulaire de la chaire Trenholm. Et je suis vraiment ravie d'être parmi vous ce soir pour avoir entendu cette conversation inspirante autour de Shakespeare. I'm truly honored to be here to close tonight's Shakespeare lecture with our esteemed guests, Antoni, Laurette, and Paul. I'd like to thank each one of you for this enlightening conversation. And Antoni, I also have a story about Picasso that I like. Picasso being at the table of La Closerie des Lilas in Montparnasse in Paris. And he made a drawing on the paper tablecloth, apparently, because for that one also, we don't know if it's true. And the waiter comes to him and say, would you please sign your drawing and to give it to me? And he said, oh, I'm happy to pay for my meal with my drawing, but I don't want to buy your restaurant. So this conversation about money making, meaning making, I hope is the prelude of more discussion and more research and eventually the publication of a book. I think there's really something interesting in your idea. I'd like to thank our wonderful partners at the Stratford Festival and our friends of the libraries, Lenore, Stephanie, Don, and all our friends, thank you, who really work tirelessly to bring all of us to those captivating programming year after year. It's really amazing, thank you. I'd like also to thank librarian Anne-Marie Holland. Anne-Marie, you're there. and the Rare Books and Special Collection team. You're all on the same the same row. You're really a wonderful team for keeping and taking care and making sure that we give to the next generations our Shakespeare's folios and all the other material, Shakespeare material. Thank you to the library's events team, Dolores, Lorraine, and Marika, who are really working very professionally, and it's happening always very smoothly, and we thank them. Thank you to the advancement team and the multimedia team. Thank you so much. And I'd like to thank each one of you for spending your evening with us. Whether you brave the cold, but we're in Montreal, we just have to dress and we go outside and we love winter, of course. Or you're one, can you imagine, where you're one of the more than 600 listeners, viewers from afar. So more than 600 people are connecting to view this event right now. So we all thank you. Chers amis, continue to follow us, other great Friends of the Library's lectures to come. Merci à tous et bonne soirée.